So, okay. Welcome everyone. I'm Carolyn Payne, Executive Director of Sioux Visual Arts Center, and this is another episode of Virtual Connections. Um, really quick before we get started with Pujan and Yijia, I just asked because there's a lot of talking to be done. If you could type your questions into the messaging, I'll ask the questions when they're done with their presentation. And without further ado, thank you. And I'd like to introduce Yijia Li and Pujan Gandhi. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I would like to thank you for being here. I'm for inviting me to be here. I'm Pujan Gandhi. I've been at MIA now a little bit over 2 years now. I'm the Jain Emerson Assistant Curator of South and Southeast Asian Art, which includes Islamic West Asia, ancient, and to the present day. And what sort of in meeting with Yijia and discussing the work and being invited here, I think it's a sort of wonderful pairing because it's in many ways unexpected. I've never been to Shanghai. I spend most of my time with historical material. We don't really have oil on canvas in India till the beginning of the 20th century. But nonetheless, it's always so critical and wonderful to be able to become intimate with studio practice. And so I really appreciated that opportunity. And one of the ways that I'm thinking that this conversation can go is that it's basically an invitation to a blind studio visit. So I was just coming and visiting, or just meeting the artist and looking at the work and thinking about it together. And so hopefully we'll all come away with something as well. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, thank you, Pujan. Do I need to introduce myself or? Yeah, I guess so. I'm Yijia Li. I'm a painter and also the development coordinator at SUVAC. And I came here for MCAT MFA program in 2015 and I'm going back to Shanghai in April. So this is more like a farewell talk to me, and I'm having a farewell exhibition at SUVAC. I think this coming weekend, will be the last weekend for my paintings in the beautiful gallery space. So if any one of you are available, please come to check it. And really thank you to Pujan that I'm always interested in art history and I've been influenced, like spontaneously influenced by Chinese art history a lot, but never had like a academic structure of all the knowledgements. But I think it's the interesting part between the conversation between us, because I mean we really have a different ways to think through things and the paintings, but somehow I think Pujan understands my studio practice even better than myself sometimes.
Thank you. So shall we get started? Can I share
Yeah.
the screen?
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Can you do that? Yeah.
And okay, we've done this. So one of the first works we looked at virtually together is also one of the earlier works that you present on the website, this sort of still life. And I think this was sort of a way for me to think about how you sort of became to identify yourself with being a painter, and what this sort of work means to you. You know, this would be prior to coming to Minneapolis, and what you were seeing.
Well, to be honest, like I've said this before in my thesis proposal, that I came here for vacation, like to give myself a chance to pause and think through what I want. Like Tom here, he's the first guy I met in Minneapolis, and the very first question he asked me was, "What do you want?" And I was like, I don't know what I want, but I think I know what I do not want. And I think this painting was like a pre-start of this journey or this vacation. And I did some research before I came. When I applied to schools, and I know MCAT, MFA program was like a mentor-based program. I think it fits me better, like meets my needs at that point better, because it's more like one-on-one, and I could have had more time to or to have more personal advice from the mentor and professors.
So I wanted to sort of maybe share, but of course the technical accomplishment and the light, and it's just a, you know, a gorgeous painting. But being sort of trained as I am, when I saw the pomegranate and knew of your background being raised in Shanghai and studying in China for your first degree in painting, the people like me, the first thing we see is the pomegranate, and sort of in sort of Chinese art 101, you're taught about the symbolism of the pomegranate being a symbol of fertility, and in particularly the need for sons, or so the desire for sons. You see it throughout in different puns, and
I think it's a universal symbol.
Pardon?
I think it's a universal icon.
It is a universal, like you do see pomegranates, but it is something that is more expressed, at least, or we see more often and discussed a lot in sort of discourses on Chinese iconography. But then when I asked you about it, I think your response was you liked the way that the light hit the seeds.
Oh, yeah.
And the joy, and what was it like? How was that painting process like?
Yeah, I think it was more like I enjoyed the painting process. When I started a piece, I look at the subject matter, or even before I picked the subject matter, I was more like, how would I paint it? How would I start it? How many layers would I to apply? And when I find I will be interested to paint, I just like start the canvas. So it was just like, as I said, the lights, the highlights, little points on those seeds just made me feel like, yeah, it will be a great entertainment to have a tiny little brush and being peaceful and patient and doing those things. I mean, of course, there will be some conceptual thoughts during the process, but to be honest, I'm more enjoyed in those peaceful
and then
process. I mean, of course, I know the symbolic
yeah.
meaning behind it. It may influence my mind spontaneously to make it juicy.
It's big as well.
Yeah, yeah, but I don't really have to emphasize the meaning of it.
And so there was that, and then another connection that we sort of went through and developed together is the composition and the relationship to sort of Taoist Chinese landscape painting. And, you know, Taoism, you know, the story, we're talking 500s BCE, at least how I was taught. You know, there's this famous back and forth between the founder of Taoism and Confucianism. This period actually was sort of a time of great philosophical speculation, because you had a lot emerging in China, and then in India is when you have Buddhism and Jainism as well. And anyway, the little anecdote I have is they're arguing, and Lao Tzu said, you know, he basically made the argument that, you know, that emphasized personal freedom, attenuation with nature, and happiness, and ways to think about the position of one's individual within the sort of creative power of the universe and coming to terms with that. So here you have a scholar here sort of contemplating the mist. And it's sort of a particular way of seeing that one is part of two and two is part of 1,000. So, and the composition we were talking about is, you know, interest versus space. So again, this is, you know, trying to come at it maybe at a, you know, in sort of a taxonomical way, but I was wondering if you, from your perspective as a painter, how things percolate.
Yeah, because my working experience, I had a good chance to look at those Chinese landscape paintings in person. And I think that, so when I look at my own paintings during the process, I tend to make them the way makes my eye feel more comfortable. And for this example you show here, it's a Mayuan. We call this way to organize the image as 一角半边 in Chinese. So it only has the subject matters at a corner or only one side of the image, and leave like a big empty space. And for me, I think I need those empty spaces in my painting to give the painting itself a break, and also give myself like a hint to breathe. Or yeah, you mentioned about Tao, and I think it makes the idea has more layers and more complicated. But just to make it simple, I like to see there's empty spaces in my paintings. And I think it's a part of the, like, non-touching is a part of the painting. And here we can see, here you show the oil painting, but also like I do a lot of drawings, charcoal drawings for my studio practice. And I think not only me, a lot of painters think eraser is another pen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, thank you.
But I really like this Marian's piece.
Well, we have to have it out soon. And oh, there you are. So, and then this is another painting that from that year. Sort of correct me if I'm wrong, but is that a self-portrait?
No.
No. Okay. So, you know, going from the still life to a work like this in that same year. Could you just sort of talk about if there was a transition or lack thereof, or new things that you were considering?
Well, even I'm saying I don't really like to rely the subject matters like original symbolic meaning, but obviously there's a symbolic things in this piece. And I think for this piece, it was more about, it was the year before I came to Minneapolis, and I graduated from undergraduate program in 2012, and there was like a 2 to 3 years gap. And during that 2 to 3 years, I had a full-time job and I didn't really have time in the studio. So those two pieces was more like my warming up training for myself. So I just tried a different still lifes, figures, but at the meantime, I also want to make it like the way I feel interest. So this piece is, I'd like to try to create like mixed layer of spaces, but I don't think I made a success example here. It still looks like a straight line, like the front view, the middle view, and the far away view. But at the very beginning, I was trying to, and also you can see the tiles on the ground. I'd like to make them feel incorrect, just to give the audience a hint that it was not a real space. So the perspective of those tiles, they're not correct. Seems like all the tiles, they are not on the same level or the same surface.
Sort of receding into a slippage of space, but then with layers of suggestion, and these sort of speaking with hands that's going on here, and we don't know who that other figure is.
There's a ring on that hand.
Got it.
And like trying to put in the ring onto that shadow's hand.
I see.
And connect to the title.
So you did submit this when you were submitting to.
That was a bad story.
you when you were applying to MCAT, right? This was something that you deliberately decided to submit.
So that was another time of saying goodbye.
Yeah. So when you are, I guess, as you always are as a sort of an artist, I always think about how that process is of when you are sort of submitting a proposal, essentially, and then throughout different ways to position and more or less sort of sell your work in a way, or not, how does that figure into the way you think about things, or the way you're approaching things now or in the future?
I think at that time I was still more like my thoughts was more like a traditional art students, just like how to make the figure correct, how to make it to say. Yeah, just on one hand, I've been trained that way and tend to make things correct. Like the hand should look like a hand, and the shoulder should look like a shoulder in a beautiful way. And on the other side, on the other hand, I also wanted to force myself to do some so-called contemporary thoughts. And I think that was I wouldn't say I was lost, but I was trying things at that time. But of course, like you can guess what the story was.
Yeah. So playing with this, I think in your later work, there's always this sort of allusion to narrative, and I think
Yeah,
maybe for you this looks a little early compared to how you've progressed, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I just thought it was sort of interesting to see this sort of work from before. Why isn't it? Oh, just as I said, oh, here we are. We'll look at it some more. Of course, I gathered from being raised in Shanghai, you've been and then working at an auction house, you've been exposed to a lot of art. But I think in particular, you mentioned that this was a painting at Mia when you arrived here. Do you recall the encounter or what you still see in it?
yeah, I think I still still inspire me a lot. Being also from the last painting you just showed, I was trying to show a sense of the time in my work, and I think this painting just this I think it's called the studio. This painting is a find a good way to show like the same space, like some certain people in the same space at different time. I think it makes the studio, the space, as the main character of the play, if it's a play, or or maybe makes the studio the only thing that it stays.
And these the subjects, there's no center. It sort of dances, sort of pirouettes, the whole sort of composition. And Larry Rivers, was really sort of going against the prevailing grain of abstraction at the time, going for this sort of painterly realism, but then this sort of virtuosity where, things fade in and out and sort of go through space. And I don't know if you knew this, but it seems that actually Larry Rivers is also really well known for painting subjects that were very intimate to him.
Yeah.
And so subjects also really from immediate life, and our relationship with them. So of course it's always where you're just down this, across the way. So it's nice that this painting sort of stuck out to you. And sort of to compare that, I wanted to share your, this is your thesis project.
Yeah, actually my thesis project was, the idea was from that. Oh, like I looked at that Larry Rivers
Yes.
a lot during the thesis project. Visually maybe, but in this piece I was also trying to show a sense of time running. But in this piece it was like one person at different time, and I didn't really show what the background space was. Also, this piece I was trying to use Chinese landscape painting skills, some of them in oil painting, especially like how to run the brushes. I used the way to do calligraphy, like turning the brush, those little skills.
And I mean, what sort of, well, in this scale, it's a triptych?
Yeah, it's a triptych.
It's a triptych.
Three.
And sort of conceived together. And I mean, one of the things that sort of struck me about this is actually the palette is almost, I remember when I took art school, you know, we were told when I mean, this was in school, you know, I was painting and the teacher said, oh, it's very muddy. And I, you know, the palette is such, but then, which means heavy, and I don't think it's it wasn't a compliment, but there is a weight here, and, but it seems to sort of have a levity to it and a movement, but yet there's a depth that I'm seeing. And I think these little moments do offer pause here and here. But you said that the beginning of this began as a towel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The white towel.
And so, and the figure, one can't not notice that we don't see a face. I mean, we are sort of rear of the mind, basically, sort of dancing around. We're just behind, maybe even sort of voyeuristic. But I was, how do you sort of, were you thinking about, you know, eye contact in your paintings and with the viewer?
I mean, you mentioned the white tower, and of course I know my color using habits tends to make color murky, adequate, neutral. So with the murky or neutral color plate, the white tower will be like those popped out spots. And also at the very beginning, I try to make those white towers as the water in Chinese as the same foundation in Chinese landscape, because we use water as like a link or connect to lead the viewer to look through, like eye contact, as you said. So in this painting, I use white tower like as the water.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And saying about no face, because you can see the title is from a poem. It's an early 20th century poem from Xu Zhimo. It's I don't know which direction the wind is blowing. I think it was exactly how I felt at that point. Like at a certain point, I have multiple choices, and I didn't really know how to choose, and I didn't feel panic, but like just uncertain, and I partly enjoy that uncertain feeling.
Yeah.
And I think it was it should be a very common experience for many people. It just like embodied in everyone's life in different ways. So for me, I was like graduation. I think graduation may be a common time.
Yeah.
For many people, or maybe like leaving home. So I don't want people to see it was a certain person in this painting. Mm-hmm. So just try to remove the identity of the subject matter. It's just a person.
And expresses through paint just a way of being for you or who's looking. I do love how there's sort of has this diaphanous, watery nature to the towel that you've incorporated throughout, and these blue little hints. So thank you for sharing that
Yeah,
additional layer.
yeah, and I also like to use the thickness of the pigment to create those layers. So especially on those tower parts, you can see if you could see it in person, it's like thick spots on very thin ground layers. So I think the physical thickness also helped me to create the feel of the depths.
And have you used turpentine? You've thinned the paint? Yeah. Okay.
Like those strips, I like to leave those strips as like, especially for the first few layers, there will be a lot of strips. And I think these are all like a record of the painting process. Like they tell us what happens there.
It's funny. I mean, of course, the drip and process is stuff that's, I mean, we've sort of distilled through, the 20th century, painting, and it's something we talk about. But I always think, and this might be a stretch, but the Tang dip. So the Tang dynasty, you have those early ceramics, and the glaze always has this intentional drip. And I always, whenever they talk about the innovation of the drip in 20th century art, I think about that. But anyway, but that's an aside here. Let's so this was the same year or just before?
Yeah, it was like it was a summer. I went to Greece during that summer, and I saw those golden masks in the museums in Athens, and just like at the museum, I was like, how great the technique in that early, like thousands BC. Like they could make the gold that thin to make a mask, and also those heretical stories behind the mask. But when I get back to my studio in Minneapolis, I was like, you don't have to be a hero to wear a mask. And wearing a mask is like, I don't think it's hiding, or at least not only hide. Then this is like, I took a photo when I finish a facial mask and tear it away from my face. It's a very normal daily movement, but also it's like trying to put a vial in front of the face. And I mean, the vial part was more like, as I said, I think it will be the interest to paint.
Yeah, the object itself, the veil. Yeah.
Like, and the skin under the thin veil, and the part that with the like eye and nose sets. So it's like a vivid solid versus like vague, like foggy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also the title is also from a poem, What a Nice Autumn Day. So the whole poem is more like when someone is young, they like to tell the stories about like how hard they were and how many tough experience they've been get through, just to show how mature they are, and why when they grew up, like really grew up, like looking back to those so-called tough experience, they just say, what a nice autumn day. Just like talking about weather, and those tough experience are not that tough, and will be just like unique and beautiful experience. So you just say, what a nice autumn day. The weather is nice, the life is nice.
Just calm down, basically.
Yeah.
Well, so, and I think that that's funny because it's ancient, and it's Greek. I mean, there's sort of a classicism, Stoic classicism to the face here. And then we often talk about, masking and how it's just as it sort of conceals and then re-reveals, and this sort of transformation. But I really like that you said you don't have to be a hero to wear a mask. And I'm sort of noticing that the ground here is a panel, and you could see, is there any gesso, or is it just directly on?
Clear gesso.
It's a clear gesso.
Yeah, so you can see the wood pattern.
Okay. Was that something you were experimenting with, or are you still working on that, or how did that experience go?
Yeah, that was like, so from that piece, I started to try hot wax.
Okay.
Because of the idea of vial and layers. So I think hot wax, the material itself, allow me to explore it, like push it further, push the layers and the transparency feel layers further. And I made a series of jellyfish with hot wax.
Okay.
I mean, look at this piece, you can kind of imagine
a jellyfish.
hot wax, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Most.
And this is in the show that's up now.
Yeah, this is in the show.
Well, I've seen virtually, but I need to see physically. So these are, in many ways, I know these were sort of created before the thesis. And this is cold wax. So, I mean, it seemed, a subject that's intimate. I mean, do you have any sort of thoughts on these?
So for the right one, it was the first time I tried cold wax.
Okay.
Of course, it's totally different from hot wax, but the same thing is it allows me to try to show things underneath a vial or layer. In this piece, it's skin. If you could see this piece in person, you can see those like teal-ish color underneath the skin, and that was because of the cold wax. So this piece was more like a material exploit. And of course, you see drips. I think drips is like a way for me to how to say, keep painting from one step to other step, or connections from one layers to other layers.
Well, and I mean, the flesh has this sort of, is made real. There's almost a sort of tactile sculptural quality to these. And I think here what I'm noticing, perhaps the title was after or before, but it's a really sharp sort of blood here that's here, and then there's sort of passion in the movement there I'm seeing. But consider you're often very, very subtle and there's so much nuance to your color, but it's just sort of, that line is sort of interesting to me.
So, because like you can see, I use a lot of turpentine, especially for the first few layers of a painting. And during those first few layers, I could be border. And so I just took that advantage and forced myself to use those like sharp colors I don't usually use. And I became like go to details and settled for the like later layers. So as you said, the like blood like part red on the foot was from the first few layers. And for this piece, it was think I only put very little touches during the later layers, like I call them the sticker layers, just to like give a hint or hints to show, okay, it's a figure. But for this piece, I think the line of the back was the reason I started it. I mean, from either from Chinese landscape or my painting and training experience, I focus on not focus on. I'm interested in like studying how do lines go in and how to make lines in different ways. So one line can show the depths, the shape, sometimes even the temperature or something like that. So for this piece, I think that line was the, I won't say all the other parts are like all servicing that line, but that was my main point.
Right. So, what's happening? Okay. So we should probably sort of move over. One of the things it's sort of, each painting here has this sort of its own sort of technical ambitions, and you could begin to see lines and landscapes throughout, this layering of colors and mixing, and I just sort of wonder here how you sort of stage narrative, and how there's sort of a tension between the moment and what you're seeing in that space in between. And so I was just curious, for yourself, or when you're thinking about the paintings with others, how does narrative sort of play out or not?
Of course, I start from narrative. I see a subject matter. I find it's interesting, and I started painting. But during the painting process, there's a lot of, like as you said, like layers and different techniques, colors. They're all part of me, and and also another reason I like those drips. I think it's like playing chase with the drips, because I couldn't really control how the drips going. Of course, because of the gravity, they all go this way. And I can just like kind of control them as mixing more oil or less oil, but still I don't have a total control of those drips. So when I have one layer of drips or one layer of the painting, it's more like they start the first move and I'm playing chase with it. So like it's more like during the painting process, I could choose and decide what kind of technique to use, but I don't really have a whole complete image in my mind when I start a painting. And even to the very end, I still don't have the complete image.
Well, I mean, I think the subject matter is wonderful. I mean,
this is my roommate's feet. Like she has those monster toes, and she picked up coins from the floor with toes. So.
Oh, I was sort of reading that in a totally different. I thought it was more of an ecstatic thing. But and I'll actually, toes are, when I'm looking at Indian sculpture, a litmus test is to see how well the sculptor created the toes. So it's always a classical. Just going, I feel like this was a piece that sort of gets to a lot of your, it's a little cheeky, but it sort of gets to a lot of the way you sort of think as an artist, sort of how one thing is just many interpretations, and it's just about this positionality between this sort of way of changeability. Anything, is it displayed? How is it displayed like this?
There are like 5x7 panels.
Okay.
Thick paperboard panels. And so there are like 46 pieces. And I display them in different ways based on the gallery space. But again, I like to have empty spaces. So this,
yeah.
That was when I first tried charcoal powders. Before that, I usually use pencil and charcoal and things like that. But charcoal powder allows me to use brushes. And
Right.
I really like the feeling of touchy and delicate, like if you breathe and you blew the powder away. And so, of course, apple is always like the first subject to practice when I try a new material. And then I figure that the apple button,
Yeah.
is, of course, symbolic again. But
well, and we've seen apple, and they say, oh, Cezanne painted apples. No, it wasn't that. It was a lot more than that. So.
Yeah. And those belly buttons, I was in the MFA studio building, so I just walk around and see who was in their space, and was like, "Hey, show me your belly button." So I think it was an interesting project.
Follows. So moving sort of on to this, it says untitled here, but I saw on the website it says self-portrait.
Oh yeah, because there's another piece. This was hot wax.
Okay.
It's the same source material for different painting and drawing material. So this is again charcoal powder, and I was trying different ways. So I put on different gesso, and for the apple and belly button, I use dry powder only. And for this one, I started to use water.
What I think sort of coming again to the idea of sort of identity and the face, I think it's what was struck me here is that it's a self-portrait that sort of has an anonymity to it, and in contrast to what I'm seeing a lot of artists producing, a lot of the art discourse, a lot of what museums are acquiring in contemporary art, whereas actually it's all about the face now, and all about, I mean, the identity, it's sort of XYZ blank artist. And I sort of wonder that you're sort of saying it's a self-portrait, but it's actually about the line, and it could be a landscape. So how are you sort of thinking about your work within sort of these sorts of broader discourses?
So I think when you see the face, it's more like you want to recognize who that person is. Or even it's a stranger's face, you just like seeing the face and okay, it's a person. But for this, look at the corner, there's an airdrop. See?
Let me put it the other way. Yeah.
Another, how to say, element to identify a person too. And again, as I put it at a tiny corner. Yeah, it's a juicy idea, maybe.
Coming back to this, and then we're going to sort of end with sort of your more recent work. You said you went to Shanghai and you sort of took a photograph, and then have almost, there's sort of this lush still life coming back.
Yeah.
And then there's ice, a man in space. So how's that transition to this work been since you graduated?
Yeah, I think it's like a circle. Like I started from kind of narrative, still life, and trying to break it, or like break the rules. Not serious rules, more like my painting habits. So I did different, how to say, I tried different materials and tried to use different color plates. And after graduating, no deadlines. And I was just like, move. So the still life was like, piece was more like a relaxing piece. Because still life is one of the subject matter I painted very often, the most often, I'd say. So I know technically I painted very the best, I think, compared to landscape and the figures.
This year. Well, that lemons, you could almost smell the lemon
So
in that warmth.
still life's like I was more relaxed and tend to try new things. So like before this piece, I wouldn't think to put those pure sharp color for the first layer. Like from the thesis project, can see all the murky colors, and sometimes I even I try to put those vivid color or bright color. Still, I couldn't help myself to mix a little bit.
Yeah.
Like mix a little bit blue into the yellow or something like that. But for this piece, it was the first brush stroke was that tea part, the lemon, and it was pure lemon yellow without mixing. And I just like continue the whole painting from that spot.
From that spot, like the towel.
Yeah.
And so now we're in a landscape and it's 3000, and I saw that this is the title of your exhibition as well. So where are we going?
Yeah, it's a nerdy thing. The movie and Iron Man told her his daughter, "I love you 3000."
So did this come from a site, or from a photograph, or?
Yeah, it's a. So I did this painting after my trip in Shanghai. Like I went back to Shanghai to visit my family in 2019, and also I went to this thing Hunan privacy with my mom, and I took photos. It was a mountain area. I took photos as my source material. But after that trip, because that was I haven't been back to Shanghai for 2.5 years. And after I came back to Minneapolis, I had those like mixed emotions and hard to tell which was which. Like not just bittersweet. It's like so many different emotions. That's why I choose this title. I think that sentence named that situation in a good way.
And so I'm just spending more time with this, and I can't help but see scholars in the mist.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Um,
like a chase, like playing chase.
yeah.
So after a few layers, I kind of figure or see the figures uh, among those layers. So again, these are only very few thick touches, mostly based on those thin layers. I just give it a hint so you can see, oh, it's a figure, but it just happened during the painting process. I didn't design it from the very beginning.
Well, I think that has us at an hour. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to discuss more or any questions we've had. I could stop sharing my screen, or maybe I could, well, if we want to see it again, we can, but any questions?
We didn't get any questions in the chat, but should we see if anyone has a quick question? Don't be shy, folks. You can type a question or just unmute. Such a polite crowd.
I was gonna unmute.
Okay.
I have a question that has to do with the nerdy title. I've been always very fascinated with that, just because I struggle with titles, and I love when they're so mysterious. And I love you 3000, knowing the reference well, and then seeing the piece. They're so different to me, but I would love for you to explain how they sort of coalesced in your mind.
Hmm. I don't really think not think at all during the painting process, but I don't think I really pay attention on those elements during the painting process. Again, it's like playing a chase, and I just had a rough idea, and I pick a subject matter because I think it's interesting to paint, and just let it go, let it not lead me. It's like, well, maybe lead me.
And then why I love you 3000 then? Because I love the idea that was, I mean, that is a place that you love. It was emotional when you went back to Shanghai.
Mhm.
It just of the moment, and I totally get that the painting, you sort of let that happen. And now I'm curious if after it happens, is that you look at it and think, I love you 3000.
Yeah, but this you is a lot of people, a lot of use. More like, I think it's a common experience to everyone that you couldn't name a certain feeling or certain emotion, and certainly you read a sentence from a book, or you watch a movie and some character just says something, and you were like, yeah, that's what it is. So this title was exactly like that way. I got to look at the painting, and I didn't even was. I usually title my paintings after I finish them, but this piece was I had a title during the painting process.
Nice.
Like, it's like a talk with Pujan. There's a, maybe because of the language, and also because of my personality, I don't really like to have a vocabulary to name what it is in paintings. But it always feels good someone else can name it, or just say it out before I could like really name it or recognize it.
Nice. It looks like we actually do have questions now.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
I was like, are you going to ask it? Oh, okay.
uh,
Asked, what is your favorite subject matter? Still life or figures?
I have to say figures. I mean, I'm better at still lifes technically, but I think I paint still lifes in the way I paint figures. Does that make sense?
Yijia, I have I think maybe an observation and a question or two. Your commitment to the figure is a real through line throughout the vast majority of your work, and you seem to have a belief in the figure as a meaningful element in your creative work, meaningful in terms of what you want to paint and what you want to use as a vehicle for expressing certain ideas. And I'm interested in that, particularly in the work that now seems to have these two, if you would, two chapters or two kinds of avenues where you have the figure being exploded in terms of expression, exploded in terms of extraction, exploded in terms of challenging representational form, and then other work, although still more loosely defined, that is using the figure in these narrative contexts that tell these stories, or they're evocative. Both bodies of work are quite evocative, but the more recent work, like the Long Bar at the Astoria, has this kind of psychological space about this lone woman at a bar, by herself, contemporary figure, grounded in our time, looking at a cell phone. And it feels like it's almost like two different artists that are working, and yet the figure is again central and steadfastly solid. And so could you talk about some of those comments that I've just made?
Yeah, I think subject matters are like trying different paint and drawing materials. Like when I was trying wax, I wanted to have those like physical experience about moving brushes because I had to move faster and having a blue gun with me, like a heat dryer, hair dryer, on the other hand to keep the wax liquid. So I carry those experience over back to canvas. And I think it's the same thing as different subject matters. Working on different subject matters, also I have those both of the mental and physical experience, and I carry them over to my next project. And when I started painting, I don't really, I mean, sometimes I'm more interested in still life, sometimes I'm more interested in figures, but basically I just look at this and I think it's interesting to paint again. So for this bar painting, the space was so stunning, and those patterns on the ceilings just attract me, and also like the floor. So because I wanted to paint the ceilings, I made it like I just started from that corner, and somehow I made it kind of solid because that's how the feeling the ceiling let me feel, and or maybe that's how I want to paint the ceiling part. And from that spot, I continue the whole painting. So the later layers and other parts are more like, how to say, trying to pair with that spot. Does that make sense? And also emotionally or like mentally of that piece is like, I watched a Japanese play called so it's a guy walking around finding restaurants on the streets randomly and eating alone. And the story of that play was eating alone is the equal right that the modern society gives to everyone. And I think it just hit me. I think eating alone and drinking alone is not a sad thing. So some people look at that, thought I was a lonely woman. Actually, I didn't even really want to identify the gender there. It can be a woman or it can be a guy. The thing is, they say they are alone, but they were not lonely. There was a phone. They could be like checking time, waiting for someone, or they could just like having a drink after work and reading, like looking through social media on a phone, like spending time by themselves. So that all happened in that stunning space. And I think that's the charming part of the city. It's a bar in Shanghai at a bound. Does that make sense, Tom?
I think I'm trying to get at the psychological impact of this work, which I feel like you're talking sometimes more formally about that. I think there's quite an emotional engagement with both of these broader bodies of work, and I'm interested in how the figure is we have obviously this extraordinary tradition in the history of art of working with the figure, and the figure as one of representation and also one of expression. And I'm interested in the kind of emotional, psychological quality about the more abstract figurative work, and also it's hard for me to understand that purely is just a casual observation of a woman in a bar, but it may be. You're the artist, of course.
Well, yeah, I don't really think they're always, because they are all parts of me, but like abstractive represented a narrative figure painting was like a main topic during my 2 years at MCAT. I think partly because that was a designed education program. So I tend to have a continued theme. And also my trip to Greece, I saw all those stunning figure sculptures. So they're all in my mind at a certain time, and it just happened. So I think it's also like different subject matters or different techniques or different ways or even different styles. They are all like also another kind of record of my real life experience at different times. And they may, like visually, they may separate, like as you said, the bar painting looks like from another artist, from another painter. But from the life experience point, I think it makes sense to me.
So Yijia, sorry I came in late, but I noticed that one of the last pieces where it's a landscape and it's the bodies in there. Can you talk about, is that something, what does that mean to you? Because I see the landscape there, you know, there's, this piece here. And I remember seeing some of your pieces of black and white drawings of figures, and then abstraction or landscapes and abstractions, but this looks to be really successful in a different kind of way. Can you talk a little bit more about this piece?
Yeah, that was
oh, this is 3,000, yeah.
This is 3,000. Of course, a lot of emotion.
Or the relationship of land and body, maybe.
Yeah, and landscape and especially Chinese landscape painting and figure body saw was also
Mm.
another same topic or theme I use
Mm.
a lot in the past few years. I wouldn't say I did a lot of research on that, but during those time, of course, I tend to, or not habit, but I tend to look through things or paint things in that way, like make figures like landscape or make landscapes like figures. And I was trying to explore the different, the different possibilities
Mm.
from the painting process. But this one was special, and I don't think I can copy that or do something similar in the future. Not at least not anytime soon, because of the emotion from the real life experience was unique. And also, as I said, it's like playing chase with the canvas with
Mhm.
the different layers I put on. And for this one, I start with, as you can see from that the still life, the T high T one, I started to like use pure lemon yellow at the very
Right.
beginning, and I found that was successful or interesting. So I use that again in this, and I tried it into this large scale landscape painting. So
Mhm.
the 3000, the first layer was pure yellow lemon,
Ah.
and it's kind of changed almost all my painting habits because I put on follow layers based on the first layer.
Right.
So and so that piece was more like testing, and I started it as a landscape painting. And during the painting process, I think it's very close to the end. And I look at the like the background view, those mountain lines, and I was like, huh, there's a figure. So I just
And that is a very confident martini. That's a nice martini. So
martini.
it's a nice. Um, well, I sort of actually very much appreciate the sort of when you, in speaking to you about your work, there's this sort of generosity and not. Of course, there's many things inspire, directly visceral from personal experience, but there's a universality and the sort of allowing space for someone else to sort of dance along and sort of find their own meaning and emotion. So I think um, it's in some ways very refreshing, your approach. I don't have, it's and the way you discuss your work. So I really appreciated that.
Thank you. I mean, for that bar painting, being alone, that was before the COVID. I took the photo before the COVID happened. And I started painting because I had so many studio time because of the COVID. So since then, it just happened. It was a coincidence that doing things alone, being apart from other people, became like a topic wildly in the whole world. But before that, I remember like when I was watching Friends. It's a very old, not very old. It's a American play, Friends. Rachel eating lunch alone. She saw that would be like a sad, pathetic thing, and then she found it was interesting. But when people saw her eating alone, they just like feel sorry for her. I think that was yeah, I just wanna let people know that eating and drinking alone is a good thing, is a comfortable thing. And maybe the COVID just force people to rethink doing things alone.
Were the chairs that socially distant in your photograph?
No,
Yeah. Okay.
that was just like a visual
Okay.
considerations.
There's one more question. Should we do that quick and then wrap it up? I just want to say quick before though, Yijia, when you were working on this Waldorf piece, I
Mhm.
think you were showing me when we were having Zoom meetings.
Oh
and
yeah.
look at the yellow, because I love yellow. I'm like, but as it came together and then once it was in the gallery, I just thought it was you the way I remember one of the first times I saw you at the Black Forest, but in a nicer, brighter bar. But I just remember like going into the Black Forest when you were a student and you would be alone. And I never was like, that poor girl, or, it wasn't a racial thing,
Right.
but I just like when you finish this piece, I'm like, oh, there's at the bar she's told me about in Shanghai. Like it's just it. Oh, I love it. Okay. So Brooks has a question real quick. I'm interested in the way vacation coincides with empty or open space in your work. Is there a similar conceptual psychological relationship between the dense technical areas and labor? Is there a different felt experience for you making the work between the vacation areas and the labor areas?
So how do we define labor?
Brooks, are you still here?
Yeah, sorry, I was typing with one hand.
Oh, wow,
Hi.
that's great for one hand. Okay, yeah, do you want to just speak on that?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I don't know how you define labor. I also don't know how you're defining vacation, but it was interesting to hear you characterize like, going to grad school as a vacation, because I also feel like grad school does not feel like a vacation. And so like that experience of studying, and then also like how you kept talking about needing these like moments of rest in your work, whether it's this one or how you place the belly buttons and apples, like in that one with the design of it. And so to me, like thinking about the resting moments as sort of relating to vacation, but then also like I don't have the patience to do anything technical like this. So thinking about that as a kind of, is there a kind of labor to you in that experience? I mean, you might also say that the emptiness is as equally laborious, but I'm just kind of curious about that dichotomy.
Yeah. Well, vacation is just a playful way to name it. Of course, MFA is not a vacation. But at that point, because I had a full-time job before I came, so studying abroad was like a chance I gave myself to not to think about those realistic, responsible ideas, just being a student again and stay in the studio. So it's more like me give myself the last chance to see if I really can be an artist. And as you mentioned, having patience for those techniques, that's maybe why I call it vacation, because it allows me to be patient, to dig into those details and enjoy those techniques and skills. But I don't really think it connects to the empty spaces. I mean, if you want to call the vacations as a gap year and gap to the empty spaces, maybe it makes sense. But it's just like, the empty spaces is more about my visual habits. I don't like to look at things just full of subject matters. Just makes me feel uncomfortable. So that makes sense. I was just and I think partly because my training background and during the working those 3 years working time, I look at too many Chinese painting, and most of Chinese painting have the empty spaces, and that kind of influenced me maybe.
I mean, in some ways, I think that space, the empty space, is actually just, it's still painting. It's part of the way, and I don't know if it's dichotomy, or is they both part of the same thing? So is it non-dual?
Maybe let's make an example. So this is a piece of paper.
Okay, here. I'll stop sharing.
It's not a good way to explain this. So I tear it here. So now what do you see? Do you see a circle, or do you see a piece of paper with a circle in it?
Yeah, I mean, I see a circle in a piece of paper. I see a hole through a piece of paper. I mean, I could see a lot of things, I guess, but you know,
But the only movement I did was just tear it off.
Right.
Yeah, leaving empty spaces, maybe it was a mimic way or tricky way, but it allows so many possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, hog the space, but I guess the reason why I was associating this vacation with empty space is because I think of the way of vacation is this like moment of breath. And I think that there's like, it's not that the moment of breath is empty, but it's just like, it's a breathing space. And that feels so relevant to your work, like these moments of breath, like for the eye. And I think Pujan's point is, well taken, that it's not a dichotomy. It's just like part and parcel. But so I guess my question was more related to how you internalize that experience. And it sounds like there is no difference for you painting like at the mark making of that empty space versus the mark making of the technical space. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's based on the material. I think drawing is especially like charcoal powder drawing is a better way to apply the idea of empty space. And I even don't think empty space is a good vocabulary to explain that. If we translate it directly from Chinese, it should be leaving white, because the paper is white. And so in oil painting, it's kind of impossible to just leave the raw canvas untouched over there. So I think using empty spaces more like find a temperature way to explain the idea of the breathing area, or maybe like a rhythm. If you are talking about the CCS project, the large scale figures, because it's more like, as you said, the marks in the empty space are not that different from the technique space. Or so in that case, maybe we can say the different of the thickness of the pigment. Does that make sense? Yeah, because I try to find a word, especially during the thesis paper writing time. and failed. I think it's maybe Pujan can find some Tao ways to.
I'll have to go back to my graduate school textbooks.
Or maybe say like, don't always use the full strength.
What was? Yeah, I mean, there's always negation. I'm trying to think about anecdotes, but it's thinking about things as neither this or that is sort of critical to a lot of, I mean, Taoism, I think, and Buddhism sort of share that sort of approach. But I think when your love of painting is why, and coming here and to think of grad school as vacation, I think is a sort of testament to mainly your craft and your approach to that. So, I don't know. It's an endless thing, painting.
Isn't it kind of true that you want to separate yourself? If you go on, when we go on vacations, we're going away from the craziness that we have to another place that's really busy, but to us, we found a place that is exciting and new, and it's like a blank sheet of paper until you fill it with your experiences, and then you balance that out with whatever you do. So when you put on the canvas, you're sort of taking these new experiences and trying to leave some of the other stuff alone. So it is kind of blank, you know. I don't know if empty space is the correct word, but you know, when you're void, like, okay, bad example, but if you get knocked out, your brain is still working. It's just not working right, you know, at a different kind of thing. Or when you sleep, is there nothing happening? You know, there's still something happening, but you choose to pick the things that work for you and the new story when you wake up, you know. And so you know, that's why I was always interested in your landscape, because there's things that the sky, some people will consider empty, but then some people will consider the darker areas, the cave-like areas, as empty, you know. So you know, sometimes it is the words that make it difficult for people to see, you know. And because I know someone was talking about title, and I was like, you know, oh, I don't like titles, but the painting, or you get the title later when you look at it almost as not just the creator, but the observer. So that, you know, when I'm looking at you right now, I see an empty space there, but it's not really empty behind you, you know. So I like to think that it all has certain levels of activity, but they're not so, the ones that you want us to focus on, even in the bar scene, that person there's other things that you could consider empty, you know, but it's a lot of things going on there, but the focus comes on that. And then the rest of the story is what the audience kind of decides to make of it and add to it. Like the person's lonely or the person's not lonely, the person's on the phone or they're not, or where are the other people? All these other kind of activities or questions go on with the viewer, you know, yet you're creating your view of what the situation is, your story.
Yeah.
So you know, I was listening, I just hear so many different things, and a lot of times the answer is yes to most of them.
So I really like how you explain the vacation part. I mean, like threw myself to a totally strange location, city, but separate myself from a lot of outside things. School, school can be an island, not an island. Of course, we have connection, but visually or the studio space that just allow me to, again, the patience to do those things. And also like brand new space. For the space, for me, the city is brand new, but for the city, I was brand new. So I like to, yeah, I think it's an interesting way to consider that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I've been watching you.
Yeah. Yeah. And Kumba Ikendis is my boss here.
Oh no, not today.
Yeah, not today.
Well, maybe, but no. I just remember seeing the stuff that you did in graduate school, and to now, I think is fascinating. The journeys that you've made and the decisions you've made, you know, and you seem to be influenced by your, I would say, travels. You know, not so much vocation, because it seems like when you go somewhere, you're going to discover something in a way where you're not just lounging in a chair. You might be, you know, at a beach or something like that, but it seems that you always bring something back that filters out in your way, your style, and you. But it is almost like you're the brush, or you're something that gathers the stuff and puts it down on the canvas. So it's very interesting to see where you've where you're going, where you come from, but where you're going is very interesting. The choices,
The journey.
the journey.
I feel like that's a beautiful place to end.
Right.
We all go on our own personal journey.
Yes.
I like your voice.
Right now. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pujan, and thank you, Yijia. And nice to see everyone here.
Yeah, so nice to see you.
See you.
You know.
Bye.
Bye.